I'd like to introduce our special guest today. We have Mark Mitten, President at Carbon8.
Hi, I'm ready. I'm excited, Jimmy.
All right. We also have Jeff Robertson, our Director of Interactive at Carbon8.
Hello, hello.
And last but not least, we have John Siu, who is a developer at Carbon8.
Hi, guys.
And my name is Jimmy Chan. I am the SEO strategist at Carbon8, and welcome. This is our first Hangout, and we like to make Hangouts a little interesting here at Carbon8. So we've devised this great show to talk about some interesting topics that are relevant to the world, and specifically relevant to our industry as a whole. And to make this Hangout as interesting as possible, we've added a scoreboard. These three participants are going to be competing overall based off of a particular discussion, and we're going to score them, give them a good grade on whether their feedback or their input is insightful to the viewer. So at the end of this competition, we will find out who actually has won this discussion. And in all honesty, what fun is it to not have winners and losers? And unfortunately, today's loser is going to be dealt some interesting results. And we actually have an example of some silly string here, which we have two of them. And the first place and second place individuals will each hold one of these cans. And unfortunately, the third individual might not necessarily be as lucky. They'll probably have a little bit of silly string with them, not necessarily in the canned form. So that's why this competition is important. We're going to let you know who's going to be the winner and who's going to be the loser of this competition, but it's going to be a fun event, and so we're ready to get started. If everybody can just give me a thumbs up to see if they're ready to go. All right. Well, let's get started. Today's topic for discussion with our guest is about the recent Healthcare.gov website and the many issues it's been facing. For those who are not aware, the newly launched Healthcare.gov, who just recently launched roughly 3 to 4 weeks ago, has caused an uproar across the country with its lack of usability and large amounts of technical issues. And through this bureaucracy, it's continue to have issues more and more. Now, although the code on the front end is really relatively okay, the back end has had the majority of the issues in regard to account creation, including sending incorrect information to healthcare insurance providers, and also having duplicate content issues or duplication issues. So there's a bevy of issues involved with the Healthcare.gov website, but let's get our individuals, our guests, into it, and let's go to the first question. Jeff, to start off with, what are the major problems with Healthcare.gov?
Sure. I actually broke the problems down, not so much into the problems that you see on the front end, but the problems that caused us to get where we are. And those two, I think, virtually every issue on the site can be traced back to either bureaucracy or flat-out fear, is one of the two problems. First off, on bureaucracy, we know we know from our line of work. Have you ever tried to get a straight answer to a technical question from someone who doesn't report to you? We see this all the time. Our client is always either in marketing or product development or something like that, and they may have to ask their IT team or their IT contractor to make some small change so that whatever it is we're doing will start working. Sometimes it will take months to get the littlest thing done. About half the time, our client will just absolutely give up and go a different route simply to avoid working with IT, internal or external, just because it takes so long, they have no control, and there's no repercussions for the IT group if it doesn't get done because they have other priorities. Now you take that situation and multiply it by 50. That's, the IT group is not just in your company, where you are the stakeholder trying to get something done. It's the IT group for Health and Human Services, the IT group for Social Security Administration, the IT group for however many millions of contractors they had on this project doing different pieces of the process, and then not to mention every single healthcare provider, insurance company in 30+ states that they're working with. How anything got done in the 3 years since this was launched is absolutely shocking that they got as far as they did. And I'm on this bureaucracy point, I'll actually ignore bureaucracy in the government procurement, because it is very important to note that anybody who could obtain this kind of contract is competent enough to do the work. That shouldn't have even been a question. And make my second point quick, the fear. Fear of criticism, fear of who's going to take the fall, and fear of leaks. On criticism, you've got about half of Congress and half of the US population who desperately want this to fail. And so a whole lot of effort was spent hiding the project from anyone seeing it. This is a bad idea. Fear of leaks, gosh, you've got something storing the most sensitive information, hopefully for every American out there. That's prime hacker target. What if somebody wrote a backdoor code that sent your information out everywhere? That would be bad. And then finally, fear of who's going to take the fall. These contractors had to have known, probably when they got into it, that somebody's getting sued. And so it's just the blame game before the project even starts.
Excellent input there, Jeff. Let's move on to our next guest, John. John, what do you think about this, and what are the major problems?
I agree with pretty much everything Jeff said. I'm going to add on to that a little bit by talking about an issue that we call concurrency. So concurrency is an issue that we deal with as programmers, which is centered around the question of what happens when multiple people are trying to do the exact same thing using the exact same data at the exact same time. So to simplify, imagine something like a restaurant kitchen. A well-organized kitchen is capable of handling hundreds of orders a night, and they manage to get it all out fairly quickly. The biggest nightmare for a kitchen, however, is if a huge party of people come in at once and order at the exact same time. As a chef, you can't only serve some of the table and then wait 30 minutes before serving the rest. For the most part, you're trying to get everything out at the exact same time. A website application runs into the exact same problem. If you have thousands of people trying to register at the exact same time, the server is dumped a bunch of requests and work at the exact same time instead of having staggered over a course of multiple minutes or even hours. And so this is one of the issues that as web application developers you have to constantly consider. On a small scale, usually this isn't a problem because your server is capable of handling enough work that concurrency isn't really an issue that you run into. So with most websites, for the most part, you're not going to run into concurrency issues. The problem is when you start scaling to the size of a web application, especially one that was as huge as the Healthcare.gov site. Twitter ran into the same issue as well when they first launched. There used to be something called a fail whale, which users would see when too many people were trying to access Twitter at the same time. And the reason is because they're all trying to access essentially the same data at once. And the server can only handle so many of those requests without staggering them out. And so the Healthcare.gov site was not designed with that principle in mind. It was designed as a small scale application. And because of that, it just failed completely when it started.
Thanks, John. Now let's go to our next guest, Mark. What are the major problems in your mind?
I think these problems that they have described, they're accurate. I'm going to take an optimistic view and say that these will be fixed. And if you look at things like Twitter or other major launches throughout history, whether it was on the technological side or maybe design of a building or something, usually these things are going to be fixed. And honestly, I think that 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now, the news cycle will change. This will be all forgotten, and people will be able to go to the exchange without a problem. So I'll be very optimistic about that. What I will say is what's been given less attention in terms of what's wrong with this website is just plain the design of it, the interface. So once they fix all the back end and people can properly go in and register accounts and search for their healthcare plans and so forth, from a technical standpoint, I believe that will all come together eventually. Could be a month, could be 2 months, could be 4 or 5 months. What I think are larger issues are just the overall usability of the website, and this is something that the press and other people aren't really going to pick up on. But I think that there really needs to be, you think about a site that is as important as the healthcare website, and you could not, you absolutely have to have the best UX, user experience principles applied to this website. And I think as you look at the site, there are just some fundamental problems with the site itself. And why is that such a big deal? Well, first of all, just because it's a pain. I mean, you think about the variety of people that are going to be using this site all the way, I think about my parents down to young people who might be a bit more tech savvy, but they are going to use their experience with this website as a proxy for how they feel about the entire, Obamacare, as it's been called. And so I think it's a real negative. Take one big example. You should never, from a usability standpoint, force people to have to register before they can look around and see what they want to buy. So just imagine if you were, a first-time visitor to an e-commerce website, and before you could actually look at the T-shirts you're interested in, you had to go in and create an account and go through that entire process. It is a major violation of UX, and in fact, apparently that was a decision that was made at a very late date that also then impacted the technical capabilities of the website, because instead of people being able to just go in and browse and look around and see what they were interested in, they had to go register an account, and that's the first place that the Healthcare.gov site failed. So I'm going to, just a side note about that. What's interesting about that is a lot of people are blaming these contractors, but apparently this is a requirement the government gave to them at the last minute, and they were unprepared for that number of concurrent users trying to register, because that simply wasn't the way the site was designed to work initially. So you could go through the site and look at a lot of other design issues that I think that are going to continue to plague the site and frustrate people. And if you look at the cost for an individual to, who gets frustrated, the cost for them to call a call center is anywhere from $5 to $10 per call. And if you look at the cost of somebody using a website and going through that process, it's about 10 cents. So this also has major cost implications.
Hey, John, at the risk of giving both of my opponents airtime, do you agree with Mark that the back end will be fixed in a few months?
No, I am not 100% sure that I think the back end is going to be complete in a few months. And the reason why is because recently there have been reports in which different contractors have been brought in to basically fix issues. And just yesterday, one of the larger contractors was hired to fix one of their networking issues, and in making the fix, it actually broke the entire site. And so I think what's going to happen in the future is that more and more people are going to get involved in trying to fix this issue. And when it comes to fixing an issue technically, it's far more difficult to look at something that already exists and try to fix it than building something from scratch a lot of times. And for a lot of these contractors who are now being brought into this debacle of a website, and most of these people have no idea how this thing was actually developed in the first place, and so they're going to have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on and figure out what these systems are all linked up together. And I think what's going to happen is that as you see more people attempting to make fixes, it's going to break other parts of the site without anybody really realizing it until it comes out on the news.
And I saw one thing about, as far as Mark, you were talking about the requirement to register that came late, and we get it as much as anyone that when you make a late breaking change, especially to something this big, even to something much smaller, it's going to cause huge development problems. The one thing that I am absolutely blown away by is that they did not account for this kind of traffic. You would want to, in this situation, assume the absolute worst of the worst of the worst scenarios. They knew how many states they had signed up. They know how many people are in those states. They know how many are uninsured or just curious. And they knew how many people in the country wanted this thing to be a huge failure. So you'd think you would plan for worst of the worst of the worst. I looked up some of the traffic stats. The healthcare people were complaining that, oh, well, it's totally about volume. We had 2.8 million visitors the first day, and we didn't expect it. It blew everything up. And so I wanted to see, is 2.8 million a whole lot? That is a great problem to have for a lot of companies if you're for profit. But is that really big? And so I looked at some of the biggest traffic days for a lot of the big retailers, which is usually the day after Christmas. And you've got people like Amazon with 25 million visitors in a day. Going down the list, it's like Walmart is over 8 million, Target was about 4 million, Best Buy was 3.5 million, and on down. So you get down to companies that are, they're huge, they're behemoths. JCPenney, Kohl's, Home Depot, they're big companies, but it's not the national government, it's not Amazon, it's not Google. It's companies that have had to do a lot of work building a website that is capable of that kind of traffic. And so this is not just an unprecedented monumental number. It's a big number, but it's not that big.
The one thing I would add to that is that websites like Amazon, e-commerce stores like that, first of all, they have far more servers than what the government has available to them, which is a big issue. And to be honest, I don't really know if the government would have been in position to really scale to the number of servers that a place like Amazon or Google has. I mean, they have stadiums full of servers, and I just don't think it would be plausible. I don't think the taxpayers would be willing to pay that much for a system like that. But I think specifically one of the bigger issues with Healthcare.gov as opposed to some of these e-commerce sites is that when you're accessing something like Amazon.com, everybody is on there, and there's a lot of people on there at once, and that does require a lot of scaling to be able to do something like that. But they're all kind of on different places on their site, and they're all doing something different. I would be interested to see how Amazon.com would handle, say, 225 million people registering as a new user on Amazon.com at the same time. So that's one of the issues with concurrency. So Healthcare.gov, one of the big issues is that everybody was trying to register at the exact same time, which means that it was utilizing the exact same system at the exact same time. And I think that particularly made it worse.
John, I think that's a great point. I'm going to go back to your what the taxpayers are willing to pay for. We paid $650 million for a site that doesn't work. I think that would buy a lot of servers and server space across the country.
Yep, and some great
Fair
points
enough.
there, gentlemen. And we did have a comment or a question in regards to the some of our remarks so far. And Jeff, actually John, question for you is, government, do they not have access to a lot of servers? Can you explain your thought process on that?
I don't think it's necessarily that they don't have access to servers, but as someone who's spent time within the IT field, configuring servers to that scale is very, very, very difficult, especially when you're talking about this level of hardware and equipment to set up. I agree with Mark. I mean, we did have a lot of money. There was a lot of money that was thrown at this, and quite honestly, I don't know where 90% of the money went. And honestly, if it was up to me, I would think that a lot of it would go to infrastructure, but a lot of it could just be the way that government procurement works.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the
Mark.
government knows where the money went. Yes.
Yep, we'll let you do the final remarks to this question here.
Okay, well, I'm going to make one comment, and that is that, the problem, I think, started at the very beginning. I heard a great comment by somebody who is runs a company that develops applications like this, and he said that he would never go after this business because he would need more proposal writers and lawyers than he would actual developers on a project like this. And I think that is just an absolutely classic statement. I'm just going to make a general comment that it is amazing sometimes everything that goes around a project versus the actual doing. And I would imagine there was probably $650 million worth of time put into this, and probably 4 or 5 million of actual development going on. I mean, honestly, I think that's probably how, if you actually were able to take all the time put into this and expense, it'd probably break down something like that.
All right, gentlemen, that pretty much wraps up the first question of what are the major problems. Now let's just take a little step back and take a look at the official leaderboard at this point. And right now the score is Jeff at the top with 10 points. We got a tie, second and third, for 9 points apiece with John and Mark.